When you first log into Office 365, it loads up this home page that has your navigation down here along the bottom of potential different either online programs, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote, or getting into, let's say, like your Outlook or your calendar, or in this case, our focus is going to be the actual administration center of Office 365 as a 365 administrator. The same navigation actually is also in the upper left-hand corner. So if you look at the little blue square in the upper left-hand corner, this loads the same tiles that you're actually looking at in just the normal homepage in this case. Our focus, of course, is the admin center. So I'm going to click on the admin and wait for it to load up. From here, when it loads up, you can see in this case that we actually have the dashboard view that it starts with. And from a dashboard view, it starts with, again, our service health down here in the middle. And from this case, we can take a look at it. We've got, again, Exchange, Identity Services, Office Portal. It's going to show you the health, in this case, of the specific services that you have based off the licensing that you have purchased. And if there are any, in this case, any histories in that part of it, you can actually just click on the View Details and History down here below it. And this will give us, in this case, a 6-day view of what was happening in the services, again, specifically for your licensing that you have. Now, what we want to see is exactly what we have here is hopefully we have a nice little green check, and that's it. And if you look at the legend down here at the bottom, notice that that's the normal service. However, in this case, you can see it looking at the other parts of the legends. Service interruption would be a little red circle with a down arrow in this case. Restoring services would be, again, sort of an orangish up arrow in this part of it, or it's an extended recovery, means it's a little bit to the diagonal, if you want to say. There is ability to go in and take a look at the last 30 days. So up here in the upper right-hand corner, you can see we have view history of the past 30 days. In this case, you could go back and actually take a look at the actual settings or configurations and what they did to resolve the issues in that part of that. Notice also, by the way, that when I did actually click on the service health, that in my navigation over here on the left-hand side, we actually, when we first logged in and clicked on the admin center, started up here in dashboard view. Well, we're actually now here, as you can see, in the service health area. So from this standpoint, all I'm going to do is I'm going to click on dashboard again. And when the dashboard loads up, notice it comes back to where we start, in this case, from your admin center. In the body section or middle section, in this case of our browser, you can see we can actually get into some other, if you want to say, health configurations or service requests. So service requests, of course, would be where you would have anything that you have submitted a service request for to potentially fix or resolve an issue. Or if you need to, this is an easy way to go in and just click on the plus right here to actually then submit a service request to the Microsoft support. After you've looked at your, if you want to call it the services to make sure in this case, you can see we actually have the mail protection down here at the bottom or any message centers, so you can actually see what's going on from the standpoint of potentially new items or new, if you want to call it features in this case, that they've actually added into Office 365, because one of the fun things about 365 is it's constantly evolving, constantly changing in our configurations, and so you want to make sure that you're up to date on what's actually happening, especially if you are going to allow updates right out of the bat in this case from a configuration. To actually take a look at the users that you've enabled in this case, in the launching over here on the left-hand side, if you click on the users and be able to expand out, and you can see there's actually 3 parts. So to see any active user, you're going to click on the active user section. And from the active user section, it then shows you, in this case, the listing of your enabled users. Now, what you have here, of course, is the ability to go in and, let's say, create a new user. So if you click on the little plus right there, you can actually add a new user in this case. So I'll click on the plus and add one. Put in the first name, put in the last name. If you hit the tab key, you'll notice by default it'll put in the same name that you grabbed from the first 2 fields if you choose to. And of course, then you can just hit the tab key, and then of course, hopefully you have decided how you are going to have your naming convention. Are you going to hopefully match your on-prem solution in this case, as you decide maybe to get into a hybrid solution, or do you come up with a different naming convention? If you have multiple domains that are registered within 365, you can actually click on the drop-down and choose a specific domain. And of course, if you want to, in this case, otherwise it's going to be the one default one if you're just using the on Microsoft default configuration in this case. If you want to set a password for this individual, you would actually click where it says type password. Otherwise, you can just allow it to auto-generate it. By default, it's going to send it to one of your global administrators. And you can see by default, it put in this, again, the email. And it will assign a license, again, because this is a trial version, we're using an E3 license in this case for our configuration. Type in a password. I'm just going to click on the type password, and here's where you can go in and actually set up specifically the password in this case that you want to have. If you want to allow the person to reset the password, again, change the password the next time they sign in. You can leave the checkbox checked. Otherwise, in this case, you can uncheck it. Come down here to the bottom, click on the create button, and you'll notice in this case So a couple seconds later, congratulations, we've successfully created someone. We have a name, we have a password, we have a license, and you click on close. So it's one of the ways in this case that we can go in and actually create a user account within our configurations as part of that. From here, of course, if you need to actually make any changes to it, you can actually just select the individual user. And if you select the individual user, you'll notice that over here on the right-hand side, you can go in and make changes to the account. Some of the ones that are right on the home page right here are, you can see, reset the password, you need to reset the password, change the role of the individual, okay, delete the account if we need to in this case, or edit it, or if we go in and add it to a group. At the moment, because again, I just created this account, it hasn't actually created the mailbox for the user, so notice it does let you know right here, it says we are preparing the mailbox for this user. And of course, if we need to edit the licensing or the mailbox permissions, it's prepping that as well too. So some of the things in this case, it does take a little bit to go through. Again, from a provisioning, if you want to say, sometimes it takes just a little bit more than, just I create it and we're good to go. Right? Another way to actually edit the user in this case is you can actually just double click on the individual user. When you double click on the user, once it loads up, you will be able to go in and make changes specifically to, again, the different settings that you have. When it first loads up, notice in this case it's a little bit different versus what we looked at within our first configuration. And of course was going in and taking a look at just what was the first name, what was the last name, the display name, and the username. Notice, by the way, the display name and username is the only ones technically required in this case, but obviously we want to do first name and last name as well too. There are additional details, and so if you click on the little drop-down area, you can see there's a job title, department, and of course if you scroll down, there are other fields that you can fill out as well too. All this, of course, is just on the first section, or what we call the detail section. Here's where you can go in and define the roles. So if you left-click over here on the left-hand side, define the roles of whether or not they have a specific global admin or limited admin, or you can change the roles as well too. Under settings, you can see we're going to allow this person to actually sign in and access the services, or we're going to block the account as well too. What license is assigned to the user, and at first, of course, in this case, you can see we have what location, as well as you can see also that we have the E3 license that we're using. Tells you how many licenses that you actually have over here on the right-hand side. So in this case, we're using 23 out of the 25. You can buy more licenses right here. And of course, if you expand this out, the licensing, you can go in and actually uncheck certain sections. Like maybe you don't want someone to actually be able to access your SharePoint sites, or maybe you're not going to give them an Exchange mailbox from a configuration. You can uncheck some of the checkboxes over here and still give them actually parts of the licensing in this case. Email address, of course, once it's actually configured, again, it looks like it's actually now credited. So you can see that took, what, maybe 30 seconds or so. I actually have an email address, which means I now have a mailbox. And if I need to, of course, this is where you can go in and add in another SMTP address, assuming that that domain has been added to your 365 account. Giving the permissions in this case for the mailbox without actually having to go to the Exchange interfaces here. So once it loads up in this case, again, who is going to allow others, in this case, users to send from this mailbox, and of course, then who's going to have access to this mailbox besides the individual user. There is a little bit on the more section in this case where you can see we actually can go specifically to the Exchange mailbox properties or getting into actually the Skype for Business configurations. So all this from a standpoint is, again, sort of your navigation over here on the left-hand side, where you can actually make modifications. Like again, if I go back to the detail sections, make modifications, and of course, then you click on the Save button down the bottom. If you don't want to make any changes, you can click on the Cancel button, or there's an arrow in the upper left-hand corner that will take you back to our configurations, in this case, of that specific user. So some of the stuff, like I said, you can just highlight the user, make the changes over here, or double-click and edit the specific configurations of that part. You can go in and modify more than one individual at the same time. So if you check the checkboxes, notice we can go in and delete or reset the passwords or edit. And if I click on the Edit section over here, you notice you don't necessarily get everything, and even the navigation is slightly different. So you do get, again, a lot of the detailed information. Again, if we want to change the domain to the office, the city, or again, specific regions, you will not be able to, as you can see with my mouse, I cannot click on the actual options over here on the on the left-hand side. So settings, licenses, results, you actually have to use the navigation down here. So it's a little bit different when you actually have multiple accounts that you're modifying. Navigation is down on the bottom, versus if it's one individual user, then you can click on the left-hand side navigation and choose the sections. So again, here we go, assign a role. Again, set it the sign-in status. You set the user location. Again, if you're not making any changes, you just click on next, next, next to get to the section that you want. You make the changes in this case, uncheck the checkboxes or check the checkboxes, and then finally submit the changes in this case to make those changes all at once. So I'm just going to cancel this, go back to where we were. But it's a way to go in and manage accounts, be it manually in this case, but manage accounts from a configuration standpoint, and to be able to upload in this case or enable user accounts within 365. While it is manual in this case, another way to do the same thing would actually be to go in and actually import in from a CSV file. So if you click on the second plus right there in this case, you can actually upload a CSV file. And as you see over here on the left-hand side, there is the steps that you'll go through. So once you actually point back to the CSV file, it's then going to read the file and actually validate it. You'll verify your settings, assign the licenses to the end users in this case, send the results specifically probably to a global administrator to make sure that it's actually configured properly. And of course, then you get the results of whether or not it was successful or not successful from a configuration standpoint. So it is another way to go in this case and actually set it up without getting into PowerShell yet, being able to go in and actually bulk add users all at once in this case versus going in and doing specifically one by one by one. So all this from the standpoint is, again, it's sort of what we call in this case the active users. Now, you can go in and obviously delete a user. So again, if I highlight Joe over here, right left-hand side, and in this case, click on the delete, if I delete the individual user, that's going to put them in the deleted users section over here. And again, the default is 30 days in this case that it'll stay there. So it's in a way sort of a soft delete, where you can go in and potentially recover, in this case, an individual user. So all this from the standpoint is, again, sort of your users in this case when they actually are going to enable them for 365 in this case. If we take a look at sort of the navigation over here on the left-hand side of different parts as we look at sort of an overview of Office 365. The company profile, of course, is the form that you filled out when you submitted this, meaning in this case submitted to enable your 365 configuration. So again, the company name, the address, the location of where you're at in this case is set up within the company profile. If you want to go and actually share mailboxes in this case, if you click on, say, shared mailboxes is where you can go and actually create. As you can see, we don't have anything set up yet. But we can actually go in and create a shared mailbox without getting into the actual Exchange configuration, which, as we'll get into a little bit later, you can see underneath the admin is Exchange down here at the bottom in the navigation. And groups is going to be an area that you're going to get into. And groups is sort of interesting in this case if you're used to Active Directory and doing everything on-prem versus being hosted. Without getting into, let's say, Federation services, groups in this case are where you can go in, and you'll notice that it only is a security group assigned to permissions for SharePoint. So it's a little bit different versus, in this case, what we're used to in Active Directory, where I have a security group or I have a distribution group that I can create within, again, an on-prem solution. Here, it's a security group by default. So if I go in and click on the plus, add in a group, again, we'll call it just like sales, and put one here for sales. Put a little description. Okay, we click on create, give it a couple seconds in this case, and I then can go either just click on close down here at the bottom, or because I just created the group, I can add in some users. So if I click on edit members, then shows us the actual group itself. It's a security group, and then I click on add members in the upper left-hand corner. This then has to go in and I have to find my users. Again, we add the individual user. Click on the add button down at the bottom. Lets me know that it's been successful in actually adding our configurations. We click on close. Give it a second or so in this case, and yes, you've added in an individual to, or a group in this case, but added an individual in this case into your group. And you click on the back arrow up here in this case, and of course then there's our group. Just like the user account, so when you highlight the actual specific group, you'll notice over here we can go ahead and edit the members, or you can actually go and delete the group. And from a fun standpoint, you'll notice in this case, if you delete the group, it does not delete, in this case, the user accounts, but it does delete the group. Unlike users in this case, when you delete a user, it goes to the deleted users section over here in navigation by default for 30 days. If you delete a group, that's permanent. Okay, so it's a little bit different in this case on a group versus a users when it happens when you go and delete content or delete information. But the part that gets interesting about this, like I said, is this is just a security group, and generally it's used for SharePoint. If you're looking for an email enabled security group or a distribution list in this case, you can see it actually tells you right up here across the top, use the distribution list in Exchange to manage your email distribution, which again would be back underneath our Exchange configuration. So if you're looking for just security groups, you can create them here in the admin center of Office 365. If you're looking for an email enabled distribution list or security group, you're going to have to go to the Exchange configuration, assuming that your licensing is set up for that. From a standpoint, of course, the domains, when you actually register this is part of your form when you submitted it. If you click on domains, it shows you the domain that we start with. In this case, this is the onmicrosoft.com default configuration. You would actually click on the add domain above it and then go in and add in your specific domain in this case. And then, of course, have to go through the validation configurations before you can actually use it within 365. From a billing standpoint, if we look at the billing over here, here's where you can see what subscriptions you have. So if you expand out the billing and click on subscriptions, notice it loads up in this case here what your configuration is set up for, how many licenses you have, and of course then when it actually expires. If you need to, notice in this case you can extend it out. You can actually go buy this in this case, and if you want to look at the descriptions, you can come over here to the right-hand side and click on the details, and it shows you a little bit more about the information of the subscription that you have. To purchase one, obviously that's the buy now over here on the right-hand side, or if you want to look at the new subscriptions, it's up here across the top where you can see it says new subscription. And if we wait for it to load up, you'll see in this case at the moment, again based on this time and date, you'll see in this case it gives you, in this case technically, the different types of licensing that we have here. So all this from a standpoint is again from the services part that we take a look at within our dashboard. Now notice when I clicked on the back arrow to come back to it, it takes it back to the dashboard. So again, I need to scroll down, expand out in this case our billing, click on the subscriptions, and it shows me right back to my subscriptions again. Below, of course, in this case, you can see we have the licensing. So if we look at the license, it shows you in this case, again, your licensing configuration. So how many we have. So in this case, you can see I only have 2 accounts. So I have 2 in this case that are assigned. And of course, then if we take a look at the notifications are where you can go in and say who is going to be receiving a billing invoice or renewal reminder specifically. Generally, it's usually the global account in this case, but you can, like you said, you can go in and actually change that if you need to in this case. So, from a service settings, if we expand this out, over here on the left-hand side, in this case, you can see you can get into the service settings without specifically having to get into specific, let's say, Exchange or SharePoint configurations, just by clicking on the sections right underneath the service settings. If we click on Mail in this case, you can see without having to get actually into the actual Exchange Admin Center, we take a look at the anti-malware policies, connection policies, spamware policies. All of this, of course, is something that you can do within the actual Exchange Center as well, too. Auditing, if we need to set up our audit reports, again, for mailboxes, they also have the reports within, again, your admin center. Sites, if we look at sites, this should show us our potentially in this case, the ability to go in and create a site collection in this case. Notice it does say, by the way, hey, you want to look at all the site collections, go to the SharePoint Admin Center and take a look at it. Skype for Business, if we take a look at the service settings, there we go. Find a dial-in provider, or in this case, our conferencing. This, by the way, we are now on Skype for Business. In this case, this is updated. And then, of course, talking about updates, are you going to stay up to date? And so when you click on the service settings and updates, here we go. When are you going to get releases? Are you going to be doing it, again, by default, you can see it's just a standard one, or do you want to be a first release, where you get updates when we are building early to the entire organization or specifically to individuals if you choose to. So you do have some options potentially, in this case, to get the releases on that part of that. To manage software, you would actually click on the user software over here on the left-hand side and decide whether or not you're going to allow your end users to download software individually. Of course, they have to have admin rights to install it on the local machine, or do you go through a manual deployment configuration in this case? You do have a default configuration for passwords. So if you click on the passwords underneath service settings, again, the default configuration stays before passwords expires. You can see it's 90 days in this case, or obviously 14 from a standpoint of when they'll be notified that, hey, your password is about to expire. And of course, if you get into, let's say, Federation Services and SSO in this case, you can set up the ability to go in and turn on, as you can see down here at the bottom, reset your own password, so let the individual set it. Or obviously getting into, like I just said, SSO at Federation Services, where actually it's all based off your domain configuration. One of the community, are you going to allow your individual users to actually participate within the Office 365 community using their credentials? Again, you can decide whether or not you're going to allow that on or off. Rights management, of course, is where you configure the, as you can see in this case, securely, again, from the standpoint, just the, if you want to call it the documents or the emails. But again, there's a little bit more than just what's here. You're going to have to click on manage, and of course, there's configurations you've got to get into as well, too. And then finally, from a service settings, is looking at the mobile configurations. At the moment, this part is just looking at, again, as you can see, BlackBerry. We need to enable the service, enable the configurations in this case. You can see in this case, add BlackBerry smartphones, reset passwords to wipe the devices. There are a bunch of reports. So if we take a look at the reports section in our configuration over here, you can see once it loads up, there are different reports for different sections of 365, from mail to usage to Skype, for SharePoint, OneDrive for business, and obviously even the auditing down here in this case to go through as well too. Under service health, again, this comes back to where we looked at really on the home page or the dash page, so with the dashboard. So when I click on the service health, it comes back to the 6-day view that we have within our configuration. And of course, if there is any planned maintenance, you can come under planned maintenance and see whether or not there is anything. Support also is again on the dashboard. So if we look at the support area, here of course is the overview. Once it loads up, again, you can see in this case, you can actually create a service request from here. Again, billing, mail, online collaboration, you choose the section in this case you go through, and it does show you the sort of the health of your environment as well too. And of course, then if you have any service requests, that would be over here on the left-hand side where you click on the service request configurations. Message Center shows you, of course, the messages, which is also something else that really there was a link on the home page or the dashboard page that we could take a look at. Other than that, in this case, you can see, here we go. So now in this case, this was actually published on the 2nd of July, expires in this case next month, and there's a new feature that's going to be supported within our configuration as well too. Finally, we get down to the bottom sections, and you can see in this case from an admin standpoint, this is where we get into, again, dealing with the different parts, if you want to say, of the core section of Office 365. When I click on Exchange, in this case, notice that it opens up a new tab, which is, again, something slightly different. It's been modified a couple months ago in this case easily, but you can see it loads up in this case the Exchange Admin Center. And from here, in this case, you would modify your, in this case, 365 Exchange configuration. Like if I wanted to create mailboxes or take a look at our configurations, that would be underneath Recipients right here where it says Mailboxes, or I can click on Recipients over here on the left-hand side. And of course, then here we go. Here are the mailboxes. And if I need to, in this case, I can edit one individual. We can double click on an individual. I can highlight an individual here. And of course, then decide some of the options that we have over here on the right-hand side. For those of you who deal with Exchange 2013, this is probably something very familiar for you. If you've been using a, let's say, on-prem solution in this case. So you get your mailboxes, your groups, your resources, contact, your shared mailboxes. Of course, then if you're migrating to 365, you would actually look at the migration and create batch files and set that all up. So again, in this case, I'm just going to come into the dashboard, but this is the admin, if you want to say, the Exchange admin configuration. You can always navigate back up. So again, if you click on the little blue tile in the upper left-hand corner, you can go back to the admin center. But realistically, in this case, I can just sort of move back and forth between the tabs up here. And as I come back over here, and I'm back in our configuration. I'm going to go back to the dashboard a moment, so it sort of loads up the home page. But I'm also then going to scroll back down, and in this case, click on Skype for Business. Notice when I click on Skype for Business, it loads up another tab. And here's where we would go in and configure all the parts for our Skype for Business. So the users, the organization, conferencing, information in this case. You probably won't catch in this case because it's relatively small in the view configuration, but you'll notice in this case I do actually have 2 users. So if I go back and actually take a look at my users, okay, so there we go. I just enabled Joe a little bit earlier in the presentation here. So notice that Joe actually has a SIP address and can use Skype for Business, as well as you saw, if I go back to the mailboxes within Exchange, he also has a mailbox now as well too. So as you create users, it enables the mailbox, and of course then associates everything else that goes along with it as well too. So if I come back all the way back to the admin center, we go back and take a look at SharePoint. SharePoint, of course, is where we take a look at our site collections. And if you give it a couple seconds in this case, you can see that it loads up our site collections for our SharePoint configuration. It shows you the URLs in this case, and if you want to go in and manage a specific SharePoint site, you can actually highlight it. In this case, and you'll notice that, again, all the tabs up here across the top. So again, a new site collection, or I need to delete the site collection, what's the properties of that specific site in this case, who's the owners, share it, the quotas in this case, or if we need to, the recycle it as well too. Navigation specifically for SharePoint, just like our other sections, are over here on the left-hand side. So again, info path or VCS, records management in this case, or even just the secure store in the apps in this case that you got set up as well too. So all this from a standpoint is, again, sort of an overview of sort of the Office 365 interface. Again, I'm going to close that window and come back to where we were. Sort of a new section that we now have is actually one called Compliance. We have a Compliance Center. So when you click on the Compliance Center, we take a look at this one. Here's where you can go in, and without having to get to all the different areas, it's, yeah, in this case, here we go in the home. We can actually set up archiving. So we can set up your archiving your mailboxes. You have a whole e-discovery. And actually, before you get into e-discovery, you probably should take a look at the permissions to make sure that you give the specific users or individuals or groups that you want the specific roles within it. As you can see, there are 4 here. So compliance administrator, e-discovery manager, organization management, or just a reviewer. And then finally go back into e-discovery and give them the rules and rights for the specific, in this case, let's say Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive for business configurations. You can define retention policies, and as we get back into defining the retention tags and policies and how you are going to manage that documentation. And of course, if you need to, you can actually import in the content as well too. So this will be going back to the import service. So this is sort of a new section that they've got in this case with our 365 configuration, is what we call the Compliance Center. I'm going to close that tab and come back to, again, our dashboard. But as you can see, it's down in this case down here at the bottom. If you have your Windows Azure Active Directory configuration in this case set up, you can actually click on Windows Azure AD, and it will then take you to a new tab or new window in this case that will then allow you to manage your configuration of your Azure part of this as well too. So a little bit of an overview in this case, sort of looking at the Office 365 interface and how you navigate